All right, Paul Rabil, Alex, is, I dare say, an A-Rod or the A-Rod of the lacrosse world. I mean, this guy, you talk to anyone in the lacrosse world, they know who he is. But here's the next step that he took. He not only played the game, then he created his own league when there was another league in existence. Can you even imagine that?
Hell no. He is so impressive. But Jason, when you and I co-founded this program, The Deal, right, this podcast a couple of years ago, and you said, what is the perfect guest look like? It's Paul. And I don't think I would ever say this about anyone else but Paul. He reminds me of a combination of these three folks: Adam Silver, Roger Goodell, and Tom Brady.
Yeah.
He's an athlete.
Right.
He's a champion. It's awesome.
He's unbelievable. And what's interesting is he's done some really big deals over the course of his career. One of the things that's also really interesting about him is he knows that even 6 years in, this is a nascent league. It's got to make big moves, bold moves in order to secure the media rights, in order to grow the audience, in order to grow the game. They're looking ahead to the 2028 Olympics when lacrosse is going to be a part of it. So a lot of runway for lacrosse as a game. And I mean, you can't bet against Paul Rabil.
You definitely can't. I would never do that, either would you. So here's a guy that has big belief, big ambitions, and the tireless work ethic, and surrounding himself with great people. I think he's going to win big here.
All right, we like to start the show by having the guests introduce themselves and what they do. So go ahead.
Oh, first of all, I love your show.
Thank you.
I am co-founder and president of the Premier Lacrosse League, former professional athlete. I'm a writer, I'm a producer, and I'm an investor.
And did you come to all of those just organically, or is this what you set out to do? Is this what you imagined you'd be doing?
No, absolutely not. Most of my adolescence into adulthood, I've just been hyper-focused on the task at hand and trying to be the best at that. So for most of my life, it was lacrosse. So much that I didn't even realize that the professional league while I was playing in high school and college was dying on a vine. I guess I just wanted to win a high school championship. And then in college, I just wanted to win a college championship. I wanted to win 4 of them. And I came up short. Most of the time, you come up short on those big goals that you set for yourself, but there's no way of getting those big goals if you don't set them. I would consider myself project-based as a worker. I like to think that I can drive pound for pound a lot of value, intellectual curiosity, and focus at any moment on any size screen. So if that's the movie business, I want to first understand its history. If that's being a great writer, I know it comes down to practice and reading other great writers. Business, same thing. So no long goal of saying, hey, I want to do a bunch of stuff, because most people would say, hey, if you're going to do a bunch of things, you're not going to be good at any one.
Mm-hmm. Right. This whole concept about not wide and shallow, but narrow and deep. It sounds like you do it very well. My question is, when you were in high school or college, or even in the pros, when was that moment that you said, this is what I want to do next?
Well, it came at an inflection point where I was just about to bail on pro lacrosse because my rookie wage was $6,500. I was drafted number 1 to the Boston Cannons in 2008. I had just played in front of 55,000 fans at Gillette Stadium in a national championship game against Syracuse. And my first game into the pros was in front of about 400 fans at a backfield at Rutgers University. So yeah, that was the little did I know business reaction, like, that doesn't seem to work out. But my immediate reaction as any 22-year-old who's looking to advance their lives and careers are now on their own without the support of the university or parents, I had to get a job. So I get a job as an analyst for a real estate firm called Cassidy and Pinkard. I did that for 7 months. And then I left because I realized that I wasn't finished with pro lacrosse. And I knew in my heart of hearts that if I wanted to be the greatest lacrosse player ever, which was just my goal, I don't believe I am that I needed to go all in and not be distracted by wages or income. And that type of stuff, if you go all in anything, I believe figures itself out.
So I want to pick up on something you said, because I'm seeing some parallels here. It's my job to sort of do a little pattern recognition as a journalist. And, I have two people who are, widely considered the best at the game that they've ever played, certainly among the best at the game that they ever played. And so Alex talks a lot about, these moments where you realize, oh, I can not only be a professional athlete, I could be a top tier professional athlete.
Yeah.
He obviously had that. I mean, you had that moment, with your high school coach, or was it before?
Probably 15, 16.
Okay.
I saw a real vision. I always say, like, Back to the Future. You see that blurry picture?
Yeah.
The picture started getting more clear once I went back-to-back years to play in the U.S. Olympic team. And playing for the U.S. Olympic team, it wasn't just Miami. It was the greatest players across the whole U.S. And I looked around as a rising junior. I was like, hey, I can hold my own. And then when I went back as the only that was only rising junior, everybody else was rising seniors. The following year I came back, I said, holy smokes, like, these guys that are my age, they look like kids.
Yeah.
Because I was so used to playing with kids older than me. That's the moment I go, I have a real path to the big leagues.
Yeah.
I guess, when was that moment for you?
Yeah, there was a midfielder at Landon, which is sort of one of the top perennial high schools in Maryland. And they ranked number 1 in the country in lacrosse for as long as I was playing. And his name was Peter Lomedy. And I would study the way that he played, even the way that he cradled, the way that he'd run and shoot on the run. And in my mind, when I was out practicing on my own, I wanted to not only get his skill set, but beat him. And we used to have this Bay State tournament, which sounds similar to what Alex was referring to. If you made the Bay State team, you were among the best high school lacrosse players in Maryland. And then there was another one in New York, and the two would play. It was called Empires in New York. So I was on the field with Peter, and then him and I essentially going back and forth. I came home that day going, all right, I'm here. I've got a chance to be the best midfielder in the state. That mindset carried me all the way through my career. When I was signed to go play at Johns Hopkins and I was a freshman, I would look at Kyle Harrison, Greg Pizer, and Matt Rakowski, the top 3 midfielders on the team. And I would just practice every single day to acquire what I saw them doing and ultimately beat them. I grew up playing rec sports. We don't see much rec sports today.
Right.
And I'm sure we'll get to that in a second.
Yeah, I mean, because I think it is interesting for you to hear this as a lax dad, which you know that I am. I mean, the infrastructure that exists today did not exist when you were you weren't playing travel lacrosse.
Well, there are pros and cons to both. It's incumbent on leaders at the Premier Lacrosse League to, what I would say, revitalize rec sports. So that means privately, out of our balance sheet, invest in it. You create a shift in momentum by making something that you're investing in cool, which I think is part of the challenge. You're talking about 11, 12, and 13-year-olds.
Yeah.
And what I learned in the business world is most people aren't like Alex and I that want to be the best of the best. That's like sort of 1%. A lot of people just love to play sports. It's fun. It's competitive. You learn. You interact with your friends. There's social status. There's a lot of peer pressure on young boys and girls right now. And so rec sports is the lowest barrier opportunity to learn all these skills. So that has been, impinged by, privatized sports over the last 10 to 15 years.
From our history together, I'm an existing fan. I'm a lacrosse dad. I have a collegiate lacrosse player in my household. And so we crowdsourced, like, what do these guys want to know? And interestingly enough, one of the questions that kept coming back was this idea of accessibility to the game. And interestingly, these are college players who, were fortunate to play the game growing up, but they're also really smart future business people. And they see that for the game to grow, you've got to grow the top of the funnel too, in terms of the players
100%.
And the fans. So how do you do that?
Well, Kevin Durant and Rich Kleiman are investors out of 35V. And when they came in, they said, let's build a property together to solve this problem. So we launched Street Lacrosse. And Kevin and I both grew up in the DMV playing hoops, because you have the access to a court outside of every neighborhood like you do a baseball diamond. And I believe that you're going to get more participants, and you also get more fans because through osmosis, you see a baseball diamond, you go, cool, I know what that is, when you see it on TV. How many people still, in the grand scheme of things around the world, know what lacrosse is and looks like? So Street Lacrosse said, let's take what we have and make something out of it. So we built a version of the game with just a stick and a tennis ball, can be played on any surface, but we focus on basketball courts. And we want to invite communities of all shapes and sizes in any look from around the country, because we're good at promoting and capturing that media, to say, oh, I don't have to have a helmet, gloves, elbow pads, cleats, and sign up for my club team to play this game. And I want more sticks in hands. Top of funnel is everything. And lacrosse stereotypically has this image as if it's this Northeast private school sport. Ironically, it was the first team sport in North America. It's an indigenous game. And it was played without pads. And the sticks were shaped from hickory tree. So what happened along the way is, I think, what you've seen America evolve into, from class to race to accessibility. And we are not different than hockey or golf. In fact, we have more Black and indigenous players in our league than both of those pro leagues. However, we have reputational challenges. The sport that I left out is actually American football. It's an expensive sport to play.
Yeah.
But in the early 1900s, a couple presidents really liked it. So they went the path of working with local government to subsidize our equipment. So when we played Pee Wee football, we didn't have to pay for a helmet. If you have to pay for pads to play football, you're going to see participation, or what we have today. The NFL won't be what it is today. And so understanding the participation game is important. And then the last thing is understanding the entertainment game. Because none of us sit around and talk with Dana White about mixed martial arts participation. They've built an entertaining product. They're a gladiator sport. And so you can't draw a business model, which is, I think, what our predecessors did wrong in MLL, around number of participants to number of attendance and viewers on screen. You've got to work both angles.
Right. All right. So let's pivot to arguably the biggest deal that you do, which is you decide, which I can't even describe to you, but because you're going to get the magnitude of it.
Wild.
The idea of starting an entirely new league when a league exists. So it's literally A-Rod saying, hey, Steinbrenners, this has been great. I'm going to go start my own league, though.
Yeah.
And we'll see you down the line.
Yeah.
Tell us about that moment when you and your brother Mike decided to do that.
Well, it was about 10 years into my professional lacrosse career. So I'd been learning about the business of sport along the way and the business of media, because I didn't want to be errant in the approach. My brother is a serial entrepreneur. So we had the chops between the two of us and the diversity around what we had learned, his on the management and financial structuring side, and me on the media marketing and athletic side. So I say that because if pro lacrosse was working, I would have built a strategy, much like we see a lot of professional athletes doing in the big four sports, of owning a team one day. It's far more difficult and challenging, and a lot of easier ways to make money than starting a new league, especially in the face of an existing one. So we study it. We actually first went the private equity route to get a bunch of overhead capital to acquire the existing league, because sports are full of context. We knew that lacrosse, not just in its 20 years prior of pro history, but had thousands of years of history. Starting from scratch was going to be really difficult to capture that narrative. But I wanted to own 20 years of pro lacrosse history, even if the wages were low and there wasn't a lot of network games. We ended up putting together an offer for about $35 million, which was a mixture of cash and stock.
And this is for Major League Lacrosse.
And every team was losing money.
Yeah.
The league was losing money at the top co. This was in 2017. So it was before the real craze that we see here today around pro sports. And I'm not sure whether they were trying to negotiate or if they were really and some of this is my stuff that I've learned to unpack in therapy and sports psychology. As an athlete growing up, you're told that you're dumb jock. And I think if I put on my empathetic hat, you walk into a room with a bunch of seasoned business executives, right? Jim Davis bought New Balance for $50,000 and has built it into a multi-billion-dollar empire. He owned 4 of the teams. What is this athlete doing walking in here? What does he know? He doesn't know how to build it. He doesn't know how hard this is. I understand.
I can feel the nodding, by the way.
I understand,
yeah.
Right? And so, however, that process, they didn't say shoo. They said, okay, let's go into what the entrepreneurs listening know is a data room. So we went into diligence and we learned about the business, and we learned more about what didn't work and why, because there wasn't a lot that was working. We had a few more attempts at striking a deal. The Achilles heel of Major League Lacrosse, myself included, of the 250 players or so, 95% of us were under 1-year deals. So sort of like, a team getting picked up overnight out of Baltimore, moved to Indianapolis. There was a moment in time where we knew, we could actually start a new league and sign all the players overnight. And our investment strategy had to shift from private equity that comes in and buys a distressed asset and fixes it to venture. So then we went a whole new fundraising path to start what now is the PLL. And we struggled because how can you value something that doesn't exist? So we at first put together a safe note, which is essentially a simpler version of a convertible note. We went out to market and people were like, I get it, but since 1990, about 200 pro sports leagues have started with a 1% success rate, and that's based on making it beyond 3 years. So I know we've talked a lot about spring football. It's a decent business, but it turns over because the cost structure is too heavy.
Right.
You get 1 million people watching a game, you can figure that out. But it's just hard. There's been a huge moat around pro sports for decades because of broadcast cable. And then once that gets democratized through streaming and the internet and social media, the attention economy opens up to nascent stage sports like the UFC, MLS, NWSL, WNBA, all this over the last 30 years. So we couldn't get the term sheet signed. We decided to go price round, went to Rain Ventures, who I want to give a shout out to Colin Neville, who's on our board now. Colin played lacrosse at Yale. That's why he took the meeting. But he will admit he had the same thought, like, we'll see. Anyway, that meeting was scheduled for 30 minutes, went about 2.5 hours. They were still hesitant. In comes Drew McKnight, who now runs Fortress Investment Group. And he played lacrosse at UVA, and he loved it. He saw the same thing, like, hey, if this is working at the high school level, college level, is once an Olympic sport, it's the fastest growing on the participatory side, ages 9 to 18, boys and girls. Why can't we figure this out at the pro level? So he actually wrote our first term sheet personally, not out of Fortress, knowing that, hey, this might help get, as you know, an actual term sheet over the goal line. We brought it to Rain. Rain said, we'll do it. Drew came on as a personal investor. That was our first seed round, but it was not enough to run the first season. They were like, we got to put some triggers in front of this, and then we can go do a Series A. And that was get a network deal, sign the players to MOUs at the time because we were all still under our MLL contracts.
MOUs in this case
Memorandum of Understanding.
Right.
So it was like, this is what we're going to do. And if you're
Meaning
interested.
the players will commit.
Yep.
Okay.
So we had them under MOUs, and then they said, court some sponsors. We were able to get those 3 done. That led to our Series A. In come Joe Tai, who I consider the godfather of lacrosse, co-founder of Alibaba, runs the Brooklyn Nets, also played lacrosse at Yale. We had conversations with him going back to 2016 on this, but Joe, as many like really top tier executives, they want to stay out of the crossfire, especially if it's unnecessary. So he knew that this was going to be a little bit of a heated battle out of the gates and wanted to see if Mike and I could get out. And once we did, he came on, and we've had subsequent rounds and brought on folks like Arctos, CAA, Churning Group.
Right.
And Paul, before you get into like those blue chippers, going back to the safe note, can you share, or at least what you could share, what were the terms on that note versus when you brought in CAA and Churning Group and others?
Yeah. Well, what you do is you put a cap on the convertible note, and you say like, okay, look, we want to raise, I'll give you ballpark numbers. We want to raise anywhere from $3 to $10 million so that we can build the structure of this company. We don't know what the valuation is. And that's why you put a cap on how it converts. And so then you agree around like what the cap is, or you disagree. That didn't work. So our price round was like, we raised X amount of dollars, but I can give you ballpark around what it's multiplied since, about 15X, 16X since those who came in the seed round. So it was a low valuation.
Yeah.
But again, we hadn't brought in any revenue yet. And you think about the nearest comparisons, probably TGL has been selling teams at really high prices.
Which is the new golf concept, yeah.
run by Mike, he's former NBC executive, ran the Golf Channels, great dude. He has been able to tell a really good story and also pull on case studies of other leagues since then to say, hey, this is what it's worth without playing a match yet.
Right.
Which is extraordinarily difficult to do and really high risk, because in the end, like, we're all playing the long game. The PLL is not going to be my last business.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You know?
So you're going in as an athlete. You've got to tell a story that says not just, I think there's a lot of potential here, but like, I know what I'm doing. Like, how did you convince people that, this was the right path forward?
Well, I looked at the history of inflection points in pro sports, and you go all the way back to Major League Baseball. And we asked the question too, like, why are team sports home and away? Why they have stadiums? What are the revenues tied to such? Baseball in the early 1900s was a ticket sales business. A lot of games for that reason. It became an RSN media business, and then it became a concessions business, merchandise business. But you play 162 games. That's a lot of games.
He's aware.
Plus spring training.
I'm just making sure I had the 162
up to 200.
right.
Up to 200.
Yeah, up to 200. Yeah. So you get to a business that was built around, very much so, even the day-to-day worker was born in New York City and lived their life in New York City.
Yeah.
And there's so much community that actually lives today, right? And it's important to get that right in pro sports. If you look at what the turning point was, the NFL, for Pete Rozelle in the 1960s, it was deciding to go on broadcast cable, which seems like, oh, home run. Wasn't the case then, because the worry was, in a ticketing business, if you broadcast games, people won't go.
They won't show up.
They jumped the TV faster than Major League Baseball did. I think the NBA and David Stern and Adam Silver in the 80s and 90s, better than anyone else, has created culture and entertainment and this connectivity around the NBA that is star-led for team sports. So what we said is like, okay, cool. This is 2017. We're raising money. I'm a testament to this as an athlete that's built a profile, because those wages didn't change, by the way, but my income did, because I got sponsors signed up, because I started a YouTube channel, a podcast. I was active on social. I knew modern media, what I felt better than anyone else. So I was like, these are the leagues of X, Y, and Z. We're going to be the league of digital, and that's why you're going to invest. We know how to leverage the new attention economy. We know how to storytell. Our largest business unit at the PLL from day one is going to be our production house, because right now every team and league outsources media and marketing. We're going to take that inside, which is going to make us fast and more agile. And we believe we're not building CrossFit or slam ball, which are new sports really from scratch.
Right.
This is a sport that already has product market fit. Our job is to get it to the red zone and then over the goal line.
So just to expand on that a little bit, if you go back a little bit, Paul, tell us a little bit about the 2 or 3 things that you thought that the prior league that you played in was underachieving. And what was your thesis to the investors, besides what you just mentioned with the media, that you can do better and ultimately build a successful, sustainable business?
Number one is, your most important part is your network. You have to have a media company, not only invested, which, by the way, one of our board members is David O'Connor, who used to be a partner at CAA, was running MSG at one point, and now is a co-founder of Arctos.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Doc O'Connor.
Kind, love Doc.
Because everyone knows him.
And Doc told us about a few years ago, the most difficult thing to do in sports is get a media rights deal. Most of those 200 leagues that I mentioned from the 90s that started all the way through, they're in rev share deals or time buys. We were a rev share partnership with NBC Sports when we first launched. Why would they give us a media rights deal? It's not tested yet.
Right.
And so the former league really struggled with that chicken and egg theory, which is you sort of need a network to develop an audience and score a rating, but they have all the leverage until you score a rating. And then whether it's entertainment, which, I always reference Seinfeld to Cheer, where Seinfeld got its first pilot big rating on the heels of that 50 million audience. And so entertainment, you test new shows. We don't really see pilots anymore based on lead-ins. Sports, with a great network, you get a good lead-in. You get introduced to a new audience, which is really important for a sport like lacrosse. So we knew we needed to get that. And we might have to fight to get that and really dig in as a network partner to drive viewership. And that's what NBC noticed. And they decided to invest into the production. We did a rev share. It was a profitable business at the time, which 3 years later led to that media rights deal with the gang at ESPN.
So one of the things that fascinates me, and Alex has this too, you just have this ability and willingness to just walk in to these meetings with these massive executives and just be like, here I am. I've got this idea. I believe in it. You should too. Let's do that. And then so where does that engine come from? Because that's different that's different from like being good on the field.
I think that, I had mentioned the stereotype that I felt for most of my career and still do at times. You don't have that when you meet with sports executives. They love it. They understand it. People another thing that we had to work on that the former league didn't have is get real corporate partners in that are willing to spend. And we had Gatorade and Adidas and Capital One in our first year. And now it's stretched to like Ticketmaster and Cash App and Progressive and so many different categories. Now, going into those meetings is hard. But when you sit with Jeff Carney, who was one of the 3 Jeffs at Gatorade, who knows what it's like to sit for a meal with Abby Wambach, Serena Williams, and Michael Jordan. They know that work ethic.
Yeah.
I don't feel pressure there. I actually feel welcomed. I feel community. But make no mistake, I think what we've learned, and you go next, is that, oh man, we can defy odds. If we were to look at the percentages of becoming a Major League Baseball player, a professional lacrosse player, or an international player in whatever sport, it's low. It's under 1%.
Yeah.
So when you do it, you sort of trick your mind into believing that you can manifest in anything. And I believe in manifestation, by the way. So that's not enough on its own. You've got to then do the work. And so, man, I study you guys before even walking in here. And I know both of you.
Right.
So I think it's just so important to come prepared. And that's another sport attribute.
Yeah. I mean,
does that resonate with you? I mean, what's your mindset when you go in?
Well, I think it's 2 things. I think Paul and I are not afraid of the work. And, the numbers will tell you that over our long careers. But the other thing is we've proven that we're able to surround ourselves, check the ego at the door, and surround ourselves with the best minds in the world. So when you go and talk to these titans, that's exactly what they've done. Now, they have fancier degrees, they have better returns and all of that. But when you look at our resume or you're looking at a LinkedIn account, we're looking at a trajectory, right? And when you look at Paul's trajectory, it screams champion, right? From the time you were in college to where you are today, it's been like this. Now, it hasn't been straight up. I'm sure for both of us, we've had this, but we're not afraid of the work. We surround ourselves with the right people, and we're never going to give up until we win the title.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they recognize. And the other part is we're talking about sports. We're not talking about gas and oil or something that's really like not as sexy. Everybody will take the meeting, A, because you're Paul, B, because you're doing something big and bold, and C, you and Mike have a real thing here. Why not? Why not?
I'd add to it one more thing that Alex had me think of, which is in the startup community, they'll say, what's your unfair advantage?
Yeah.
Our unfair advantage is that I had a relationship with the players. I can't run a league and play in a league against myself.
Right.
And the unfair advantage was, okay, you could have, hypothetically, a few other folks come in and pitch starting a pro lacrosse league, but if they don't have the players,
right,
it's all for nothing.
Right.
So in any line of work, what's your unfair advantage? Table stakes, you have to be a subject matter expert.
But that relationship with the players is a critical one. I mean, it's interesting because you've now sat on both sides of the table of like being an athlete, being an owner. You were essentially doing both at the same time.
Well, Alex said it, and it's not, I think it's actually really, really underrated in the entertainment world, which is what we're in as a pro athlete or, if you're in cinema and you're an actor or even a writer, is being humble and having a level of self-awareness and being kind to your peers that actually doesn't exist everywhere. But the people that I try to surround myself with have that. They also have the freedom to check me when I get over my skis. I notice Alex has that. And, now an owner of the Timberwolves, you probably have a really natural and authentic way about going and talking to the players on the team. And that's different than traditional sports owners, where there is a pretty clear and distinct wall between ownership and players. And that's why a lot of times unions started.
Let me add this. I think what Paul and I can do very well is we can be the bridge between institutional capital and the athletes, because we now know how they both think.
Yeah.
And that is really, I want to underscore that, because especially as an owner of the Timberwolves and the Lynx, I see how valuable it is to have empathy for the players, to understand how difficult it is today. It's never been harder to be an athlete in today's world. At 2024, thank God social media wasn't around. Yeah. I got myself in enough trouble. God, with social media, if it was in the heyday when I played, it would have been that much more challenging. So having empathy for today's player, I think is crucial.
And sometimes empathy is just sitting with emotions and not jurisdicting, which is, as executives, is what you feel like is next.
One question when you think, I love what you're thinking, but when you're describing what you did, which is beautiful, and this is what makes you kind of Paul one of one, is Adam Silver's the same way.
Yeah.
He's just a tremendous commissioner. Any commissioners or leaders out there, domestically or internationally, that you look and study to see how you can apply to your league?
Mm-hmm. Adam is a friend. He's a mentor. I try to get with him a couple times a year. Mm-hmm. He is absolutely that. Whether it's Adam, whether it's Jimmy Pitaro, whether it's Don Garber, the best executives I've noticed in sports and sports media, they have velocity. But it's not just returning your email or your text fast. It's doing it thoughtfully. And I think that, to your point, when you're a senior executive, your job is to keep the wheel going. Talent really matters. You can't forget what business you're in. Mm-hmm. We run the PLL. We have to think about and spend a lot of time with our players. Mm-hmm. Is that revenue driving? You could throw dotted lines to such, sure. But it's the essence of what you do. So I think being able to understand that is of utmost importance.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that strikes me is that both of you are quite evolved. And I also know have done a lot of work on yourselves. You talk pretty openly about being in therapy. You've talked about that a lot as well. How has that changed you? And I'm going to turn it on this guy too, but how has that changed you as a leader?
It's a great question. I asked Alex about this in the past because my concern originally about sports psychology and therapy is that it would make me soft. And now I think about the soft masculine and how that's the most powerful version of ourselves, where we can be empathetic and then also turn up the dial on our competitiveness. And it's not a light switch. So I had to learn that because I wanted to be the A-Rod of lacrosse. I wanted to be the MJ of lacrosse. I wanted to be, what Tom Brady was. And I see these fierce competitors, fierce. And, on the cover of the book, that runs in at direct odds with understanding or having perspective around losing being okay or part of the process. And we will heal, we will actually grow. So it was a challenge for me to get into it. And then and I want to give a shout out to my sports psychologist, formerly Dr. John Elliott. Once I got into sports psychology and understood that actually, no, it's a superpower and you're not going to lose that, and kind of that metaphorical dial versus switch, and that you're going to become a better leader, which is what helps teams win. It was just all in for me from there. So I was doing therapy twice a week, every week for 7 years. And it became like practice. And like practice, going back to what we do in sport, when we love in sport, is you can feel yourself improve and learn about psychology. And that psychology on the business side has been a big unlock for me. What I've learned, the difference therapeutically between being an athlete and a business person, is this. In sports, you can win with sheer willpower and effort and strength, and it's designated to do such.
Yeah.
We're going to square off. One of us is going to win and one of us is going to lose. So might comes into play. In business, that's the absolute wrong idea. You don't want to go into a partnership where you won the deal and the other person feels really bad, because guess what? That partnership ain't going to renew.
Right.
And you want to be in the renewal business. And I know that we've discussed that before, so I'd be curious what you think of it.
No, I always say the 90% rule, right? If, in order to get a deal, both sides, I feel, have to hurt a little bit and win a little bit, right? It can't be like all one side or that'll be the last deal. But let me bring you inside, because I agreed with everything you said about the stigma around therapy, around sports. And we've come a long ways. I mean, we're now 2024, but bring you back about, call it 20 years back into our clubhouse when George Steinbrenner was still running the team. So George Steinbrenner says, I want to introduce Chad. He is a very, very good sports psychologist. His office will be right next to mine. Come see him anytime, okay? 2 years, we had 0 people walk in that room.
Wow.
So then he reintroduced him. And he said, hey, I want to introduce Chad. He didn't say reintroduce Chad. He's a performance coach. 23 out of 25 of us went in there. But Chad is such a great guy, became still a very close personal friend and an integral part of the 2009 championship team. But talk about how you label something. And the way to go around it goes from psychologist to performance coach.
Yeah.
Athletes, we bought into performance coach.
And that's just also underscores culture, which is set at the top. And Mr. Steinbrenner's focus on his belief and how that could help the team.
And so how do you apply all these lessons that you have learned to what feels like a critical moment? Maybe there are a lot of critical moments, but this one feels like a critical moment in the business of lacrosse. Like you're looking ahead to 28 in the Olympics. You've merged, as you said, the PLL and the MLL. You've absorbed the league that you essentially usurped. What needs to happen now? Things are trending the right direction, but what are those key decisions you have to make, or the key things that need to happen next?
Well, a few highlights. So when we launched our league, we were wholly owned, still are, a single entity. We changed to a touring model, which is part of what got us in the door with these investors, unique. And so we looked at the UFC, F1, tennis, golf, and said, okay, if you can bring all of your teams and descend upon a major market city in a professional venue one time a season, then you're going to flip the supply and demand curve, because lacrosse fans aren't as big as basketball, football, or soccer fans in America. So we have a different model. I'll come back to that. If you looked at what we did from a media standpoint, we were able to grow year over year, double digits since we've launched in owned and operated social and digital, and now with our media rights deal with ESPN. We were to raise great capital to support our players and new business initiatives like we just talked about. For us, as we look into now getting lacrosse back into the Olympics in 2028, if those are the goalposts, how does this league transform into a top 6 team sports league in North America? And what that transformation may look like is no longer tour. And if you think about what we had talked about, what worked with Major League Baseball and still does with team sports leagues, it's community. And so we are working pretty actively on dual scenarios, continuing to build out the wholly owned model that's tour-based with our teams in home markets and going to those home markets, expanding our schedule, which is in our business called tonnage, which means you get more hours on television, which helps your media rights deal. To then path 2, which is selling our teams. We have 8 of them. And if you have great owners in markets like Minnesota, like down in Utah, like we have in New England, the Crafts are investors. And you find the right ownership group with the package of owning a venue with other sports properties that they can cross-promote against.
Right.
Effectively, their lead-ins, as I had talked about the value of networks, that's a real path. And it doesn't stop at 8. If we choose that shift maybe to a trade association model, or what Don Garber did in MLS, which you maintain a single entity, and he had Soccer United marketing, and owners came in, they owned the right to their team and their pro rata position of 49% of some, which owned US and Mexican soccer rights. Our version of, call it some marketing, is women's lacrosse ownership. We own the largest media company called TLN, youth lacrosse investing. We have these other properties that are really valuable and big in addition to just owning a team. So that's how that model could flex. And then you go from 8 to 10 to 12 to 14 to 16, and you're really leaning into community and real estate, where if I think about what makes sports high multiple businesses, enterprise businesses, it's attention, right? Through your partnerships and everything else I talked about. It's revenue. So it's your corporate relationships, it's tickets, it's merchandise, it's youth, community, and then real estate.
So Paul, when you think about that model and you're going kind of two different paths at the same time, which I think is super smart to give you options as an entrepreneur, in 5 years, what do you think is the North Star? And if you can have it your way, what is the perfect comp that another league is doing where they're humming right now?
So if we're touring, our players will be full-time living in markets, practicing every single day, averaging 6 figures in wages. We will be playing, instead of 14 weekends of the year, upwards of 24. If it's individually owned, then we'll have our players in those markets. Their salaries are passed through to team owners. They have their venues that they're a part of. The tonnage moves from 14 to 24 weekends, which is looking like probably 48 to upwards of 80 games. And that's a really good business for us from a breadth of properties. We're entering a new rights negotiation. Our 4-year deal with ESPN goes through 2025. I think the media environment is really exciting. People look at what would often be considered the best business model over the last 60 years in America, the cable bundle, as an indictment on media companies. They're just losing that frothy business model, which used to have 110 million, but they're in the business of content ownership, content licensing, and distribution.
I have one more on that. So Paul, when you think about it, just want to get I'm thinking of you like if I'm an investor, right? So I'm literally pitching you like you're looking for my capital, even though you're not. In 5 to 7 years, is it fair to say that you're either something like the NBA model or something like the UFC model?
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah. And I think both paths are really valuable.
I agree.
You know, the UFC sold to Endeavor as they staged up for about $4 billion. And then Bob and Willow Iger just bought Angel City at a $250 million post. So I think it would probably be NWSL or UFC. And I believe our enterprise value as a league will be in the multi-billions over the next 5 years.
And where is it today approximately?
Under 1 billion. I can't give you more than that.
That's fair.
That's fair. A number between 0 and 1 billion. But look, sports leagues and teams on average trade for 8 to 10 times revenue.
Right.
And the reason why is all that we had just discussed, Warren Buffett calls them monopolies because of scarcity. That's that. And what the technologists would say, our LTV is 30 plus years. You know, you get someone into a game, you get them to be a Yankees fan, it lasts a lifetime. That's way different than even the streaming business.
LTV for those who aren't.
Lifetime value.
There you go.
So you figure out how much getting Alex to be a fan of the PLL is worth to us from a revenue standpoint. And then you do what's called a customer acquisition cost analysis. So you build your CAC. How much then would it cost me from a marketing and investing into getting Alex? And is that a profitable difference? Right. So if we're running a software business which kind of talking about would be intimidating to walk into a room because it's not our cup of tea like sports was, then I would be pitching our next round of financing around how low our CAC is and how big our LTV is. And then you just pour it on customer acquisition. We're in that stage right now where we have a good idea around where we need to spend on awareness. And casual sports fans, there's 260 million in the US. When we launched the PLL, we had 15 million lacrosse fans in the US. Now we have 46 million. It's according to an MRI Simmons report. That's in just 5 years of operating. So we'll do this all the way through LA 28, which one more stat, when I started playing, there were 18 countries. Now there are 92.
Wow.
All right. We're going to do our rapid fire now.
A lot of pressure.
Shit. I thought that was
a lot of pressure.
Keep it tight.
Okay.
All right. What's one word to describe your deal-making style?
Compassionate.
What's more important to you, instant gut or data?
Gut.
Who's your dream deal-making partner?
Mark Cuban.
Good one.
What's the best deal you've ever made?
The next one.
What's the best piece of advice you've received on deal-making or business?
I think actually from Alex, and making sure that everyone feels a little pain and they also see the big picture of why they're letting go of something for something much bigger.
What's the worst piece of advice? And don't say Jason, please.
Win the deal.
Win the deal.
Win the deal.
I like that one.
What's your hype song before you go into a big meeting or negotiation?
I fall back to 90s rock, honestly. Like I listen to Rage Against the Machine before workouts still. But before a meeting, like I didn't listen to Rage walking into this.
Okay.
I try to, you know what? I'll say that try to listen to something that has to do with the meeting in advance.
Huh.
I countlessly, whether it's interviews or pitches, I've picked up something in the last minute, walking into the door, that was seminal to closing it.
Interesting.
Take lacrosse out. If there's only one sport you can watch for the rest of your life, which one is it?
I'd call it football, but the English Premier League.
Okay. What team do you want to see win a championship more than any?
The Boston Cannons. My first team.
First team and revived now for the new look PLO.
A fun fact about yourself that your colleagues will be surprised to hear about.
I'm a failed musician.
Ooh, that's a good one.
I've always wanted to play. I've tried to play the piano well. I used to get lessons when I was younger. I've tried to pick up the guitar as an adult and watch YouTube videos. Just haven't been able to get and even drums. Like as an athlete, I'm embarrassed to say because you think we're really well coordinated. I just can't figure out the multi-movements of music. So you guys can bet that it won't be musician in there at some point.
Paul Rabil, failed musician.
Yeah.
Next time on The Deal. This has been really fun. Thank you.
Thank you,
Really
Paul.
good.
Awesome.
I started sweating in that
the
rapid fire.
fire?
Yeah.
Listen, pressure.
Sports psychology, man. I learned that too, by the way, is that, your body, you feel nerves in big moments. And I remember John Elliott telling me it's a good thing. He's like, if you're not feeling it, he was like, whoa. I thought, he was like, no, don't say nervousness. That means you're not prepared. Nerves, our bodies as athletes, when we're walking on the field, it heats up. That's our muscle fibers and twitching beginning so that when a defender's coming at me to take my head off, I can react and dodge by him.
Yeah.
And that's just the feeling that you're feeling.
Right.
And that was a change of framing, which if I didn't give that answer on one of those rapid fire questions, I'm sure it's like framed differently and always optimistically.
Beautiful.
You're the man. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you, Paul.